You know, Martin, it feels like lately everywhere you look, there's just so much friction, so much division. I've been watching a lot of what's going on, all these protests, and honestly, it makes you wonder if it's all just natural or if there's something else at play, a bigger hand stirring the pot.
I totally get what you mean, Peter. It's almost unsettling how quickly things can escalate and the narratives that immediately form around these events. You see people out there genuinely passionate, but then you also see a lot of uniformity, like everyone suddenly has the same perfectly printed sign. It does make you raise an eyebrow, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's like there's an almost theatrical element to it sometimes, and the speed at which these movements seem to coalesce across vast distances with seemingly synchronized actions, it's not just organic. I mean, the idea that some of these things might be false flag type operations, or at least heavily influenced and paid for, it's not as far-fetched as it sounds when you start looking at the details.
So you're suggesting there's a globalist agenda behind some of this. That's a strong claim, but one I hear more and more. The idea that certain powerful entities might benefit from societal unrest, from keeping people polarized and focused on us versus them rather than common ground.
Absolutely. Think about it. The more we're fighting amongst ourselves, whether it's over Free Palestine or some other seemingly unrelated issue that gets thrown into the mix, the less we're looking at the bigger picture. It's a classic divide and conquer. They want us to pick a side, but what if neither side truly represents your interests? What if the whole game is designed to force you into a camp you don't even belong in?
That's a very unsettling thought. The polarization is definitely undeniable. Social media certainly plays a huge role in amplifying those divisions, creating echo chambers where people only hear reinforced versions of their own beliefs, making it harder to find any kind of middle ground. It feels like a deliberate strategy to fragment society.
It does feel orchestrated, doesn't it? Like there are people just waiting for an opportunity to push things in a certain direction, to fan the flames. And how do you even manage that? My gut reaction is almost total avoidance, because the minute you engage, you're caught in their game. But then, is avoidance truly a solution when your national identity feels like it's being eroded away by this globalist model?
That's the real tension, isn't it? You want to stay out of the manufactured drama, but at the same time you care about your community, your country. This idea of national identity being eroded by a globalist model, can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Is it about cultural dilution, economic shifts, or something else?
It's all of that, really. It's the constant push towards this one world view, where traditional borders and distinct cultures are seen as obstacles. And don't get me wrong, I think it would be fantastic if we could all just trade fairly, and skilled workers could migrate easily, enriching everyone. But that's not what seems to be happening on the ground.
You mean there's a disconnect between the ideal and the reality?
Exactly. You have different societies with vastly different standards of living, different social structures, sometimes high unemployment. When people from those circumstances come into a more developed country, they often see the advantages and understandably want to exploit them. But it's not always about coming here to build a new life through hard work and contribution, which was often the case in the past.
So the intention of migration is shifted, in your view, from a desire to integrate and build to perhaps a more opportunistic approach.
That's what I observe. I hear stories about people coming over because they don't feel they belong where they came from, or they see opportunities here that aren't necessarily about long-term contribution. And this has a massive impact on the working class, doesn't it? Because they're the ones who often bear the brunt of these rapid societal shifts.
You're right, the working class often feels the pressure most directly. Job competition, strain on public services, housing. And you touched on housing earlier, talking about how some areas can be deliberately transformed. Could you elaborate on that? Because that's a pretty heavy accusation against urban planners or even government policy.
Well, it's not always about explicit malice, but the outcomes are clear. You take an area where people have worked hard, bought their homes, maybe even their old council houses, and done them up. They've climbed a ladder. Then, sudden developments start appearing, often populated by people who, for whatever reason, have issues or fall into a lower economic bracket, sometimes newly arrived immigrants. They're all placed together. What happens? Property values stagnate or even decline.
So the people who invested in that community, trying to better their lives, suddenly find their primary asset, their home, is devalued, and they can't get off the ladder, as you put it, because there's no upward mobility for their property value. That's a significant blow to their financial future, isn't it?
Exactly. And then you hear about government compulsory purchases, where they can buy back properties at a lower rate than what people paid for them. It feels like a deliberate manipulation, almost a way to disempower people economically, making them lose what they've worked so hard for. It's quite frankly disgusting, because it suggests a deeper agenda than just urban renewal.
It definitely paints a picture of systemic manipulation, where policies, even seemingly innocuous ones, can have profound negative effects on individual citizens. And if we connect this back to the globalist agenda you mentioned, it starts to look like a move towards a global government, where national sovereignty and individual property rights are secondary.
That's precisely it. Look at Brexit, for instance. The public voted for a certain direction, but did the policies really change? Not in any meaningful way. It was like, oh, you voted for this, but we're still going to do what we like. It makes you question the very concept of democratic representation, because the agenda seems to run deeper than electoral outcomes.
So even when people try to assert their will through the ballot box, the underlying direction remains largely unchanged. That's incredibly frustrating and disheartening for anyone who believes in democratic principles, and it reinforces the idea that there's a persistent, perhaps unelected, power structure at play.
It really does. And on the immigration point again, it's not about being against people coming here to work, pay taxes, or contribute. If you come as a student, if you genuinely want to be a part of society, to build it up, that's one thing. But when people come here to disrupt the social ecosystem because they don't understand it, or they genuinely believe their ways are inherently better without integrating, that's problematic.
You're highlighting the difference between assimilation and disruption. An ideal scenario would be integration, where new cultures enrich the existing one while still respecting the foundational societal norms. But you're saying sometimes it's less about integration and more about an expectation of immediate advantage or even a disregard for the established system.
Exactly. I've seen it firsthand. We have a sizable Polish community, and older generations built businesses, settled down. Then you had a later influx where people believed there was abundant building work, but there wasn't. They'd paid to come over, ended up with no work, some on the streets turning to drink. And then the established Polish community would tell them, go back to your own country, you're embarrassing us. We came here and worked, and there's no work for you here.
That's a really stark example of how misguided expectations can lead to personal tragedy and also create friction within immigrant communities, not just between immigrant and host communities. It speaks to a larger issue of false promises, or at least a lack of clear information for those migrating.
It does, and to a degree it's true there isn't always work for everyone, especially if you're not willing to create those opportunities yourself. The best bet for a better life is often to be proactive, to make those changes happen. But that's hard when you're being socially and politically engineered, when society is being polarized into believing certain things.
The social engineering aspect again. That's where it gets really insidious, isn't it? The idea that our beliefs, our identities, are being shaped by external forces, and the polarization makes it easier to control the narrative. You mentioned liberal applications or questionnaires. Are you talking about a kind of ideological litmus test?
Precisely. It feels like we're heading towards a point where, for jobs or even certain social circles, you might have to fill out massive questionnaires, and based on your answers, they might label you a racist or not fitting the company's ideology, and then you're out. It's like they're trying to do the thinking for you, presenting only a few approved paths to follow, much like how some religions insist you must believe everything written rather than questioning who.
So conformity becomes the new currency. Critical thinking, individual opinions, even personal experience are devalued in favor of aligning with a predetermined ideology. That's a truly concerning prospect for free societies, because it stifles dissent and innovation and ultimately genuine human connection.
It absolutely does. It makes you feel like you sometimes have to live outside the system, but you also have to engage with it. And how do you do that without drawing too much attention? You want to be modest, careful on social media, because having an opinion, putting it into text or video, can now get you flagged, or even worse, arrested in some places. I mean, even this discussion could be flagged somewhere because I'm not an authority on politics.
That's a very real concern, Peter. The chilling effect of cancel culture, or the fear of misinterpretation, is palpable. It discourages open dialogue and honest expression, which are vital for a healthy society to address its problems. If people are afraid to speak their minds, how do we ever truly understand diverse perspectives?
Exactly. And it's not just about politics. Take diversity. While the intention might be noble, sometimes the way it's implemented, by fragmenting things further and further, race, gender, everything, it actually creates division. It does the opposite of what it's supposed to do. I mean, I just accept people and things the way they are. I don't need to overthink it.
That's a powerful point. When diversity becomes about creating more categories and distinctions rather than finding common humanity, it can indeed lead to greater separation. It's almost like identity politics gone awry, where group identity overshadows individual connection.
Right? Like when someone says, oh, you have to be culturally aware, you can't be inappropriate, you have to do this, you have to do that. It makes every interaction feel like walking on eggshells. I wouldn't be surprised if future guidebooks tell you how to deal with non-nationals, what body language to use, what not to use, even with people with disabilities.
That level of prescribed interaction would be incredibly stifling. It drains the spontaneity and genuine connection out of human relationships. And you mentioned a very specific example with disabilities, with a client who's partially sighted, and how people naturally rely on body language for clarification. It highlights how complex these human interactions are and how much we subconsciously communicate.
Yeah, it was interesting. My partially sighted client, I'd be in a shop with them or talking to a workman, and when my client couldn't use body language as much, the other person would automatically look to me for that clarification, for that non-verbal cues. They were just programmed to seek it out, without even thinking. It shows how deeply ingrained these social signals are, and how much we rely on them for understanding beyond just words.
That's a fascinating insight, Peter. It underscores that human communication is so much more than just verbal. And when you start putting artificial barriers or overly prescriptive rules on how we interact, you lose that richness. It brings us back to the idea of authenticity versus engineered interactions.
Exactly. So when you try to force certain types of awareness or sensitivity in ways that are unnatural, you just fragment things more. My point is, the best bet for navigating all this chaos and manipulation is to really think for yourself, to question things, and to create your own opportunities rather than waiting for them to be handed to you, or being told what to believe.
I think that's a crucial takeaway, Peter. In a world where there are so many competing narratives and so much pressure to conform to one ideology or another, the ability to critically evaluate information, to foster genuine connections, and to take personal agency becomes absolutely vital. It's about building resilience and finding your own truth amidst the noise.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Martin. It's a lot to think about, isn't it? But hopefully, by discussing these things openly, we can all start to see some of the underlying currents a little clearer. Thanks for joining me on this today.
Absolutely, Peter. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation. And for everyone listening, keep those critical thinking hats on, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.